What's changed or has not changed with keratoconus? Actually, this rings a bell from Roger's presentation earlier today, but there's actually very little in the way of overlap here, I'm pleased to say, because I rather thought we might be talking about the same thing. Now, that is a big, long shopping list on the left, and you probably can't read it, but I have got an idea on how to improve things a little bit. What's changed and what's not changed with keratoconus? That wasn't intentional. Why did that happen? Well, keratoconus, I don't think keratoconus itself has changed very much. We have various different types of keratoconus. You see a lot of it these days in the clinics, that's for sure. And we would call it, well, keratoconus is something of a misnomer. You don't see that many of them which resemble in the slightest a cone. There's various other different shapes. This one that's, oh, sorry, can you go on and another one? No. This one that's on the screen at the moment resembles a cone insofar as the apex is in the centre. They're not that often like that, particularly when they're as advanced as this one. And the next. Steve introduced this term, pellucid marginal degeneration, earlier today. I eventually, after having heard this expression for a number of years, decided to look up pellucid, because I didn't actually know what it meant. And it means clear, which is strange because it isn't always clear. So this term pellucid marginal degeneration is often abbreviated to pellucids for some reason. So I'm not quite sure. There's another slight misnomer here. We have pellucids as a condition. And can you move on that one? This is, I might remember this one from Steve's this morning. This is one of my long-standing advanced, oh, I can't make this move. I'm not doing very well with this, am I? Oh yeah, this one. You could be forgiven, talking of curvatures, you could be forgiven for thinking this one is concave on the visual axis if you look at it in the vertical meridian, and very steep on the lower half of it, but it just goes to show that measuring the topography has some limitations, let's say, when it comes to attempting to analyse keratoconus or fitting of contact lenses. Come to the next one. And this is the same eye, as a matter of fact, taken about 20 years later. And it's much the same shape, got a little bit opaque on the apex, belying this term pellucid, because it's not clear anymore. But you can still see that it's concave on the visual axis. And next, please. And we have the keratoglobus, spectacular, but fortunately much rarer. And the next one. And this is the most spectacular, most globic keratoconus I've ever seen at Moorfields or anywhere else. It's hemispherical. It's just quite stunning. He's had the other eye transplanted many years ago. And he's okay with the grafted eye, but the problem with trying to graft an eye like this is that the donor has to go very close to the periphery of the cornea in order to achieve anything. That puts it in proximity to the limbal vessels, blood vessels, and thereby increasing the risk of rejection. So it's not a good one for even the most adventurous gung-ho surgeons. They would shy away from this. Next one, please. And this is, Susie showed a very similar illustration to this. This is, I find myself drawing this diagram to quite a lot of people. I just get the impression that people who come into the clinic don't really understand why the condition works and why we make such a song and dance about contact lenses, why we set up these complex clinics. So I draw this picture quite often, and sometimes it's not just at the first time either. Sometimes it can be 10 years down the line because I'm picking up the feeling that this person has not really understood it. So having an understanding of keratoconus from the outset or even at a later date, a big improvement in helping the management. It's very much a two-partnership setup managing keratoconus. We do what we can, but I always think we do about 10% of the work and you have to do 90% of it. We go home and watch television. You have to go home and put up with the difficulties of keratoconus. Besides, the next one, please. So this is, just to illustrate the simple myopia, the diverging lens. The parallel rays of light move that focal plane back towards the retina a bit. If you're a simple myope, this country is about 30% of teenagers become myopic, not keratoconic. But if you are keratoconic, then you have what you would describe as a chaotic refraction at the corneal surface. And all of these intersections of the light are focal clusters. So if you put a minor spectacle lens up to approximately correct the keratoconic myopia, all you achieve is to push all of those focal clusters back a bit towards the retina, but you don't put enough of them on the retina at any one time to make a sensible, clear image out of it. If you put a contact lens onto that, then the space between the lens fills with fluid, or there's a compressive contact zone somewhere on the cornea. Either of those improve the vision because they neutralize that irregular surface. So when there's light hit, can you go to the next one, please? When the rays of light are bent by the new pristine refracting surface, that is the front surface of the contact lens, it converges onto the corneal surface. But at the corneal surface, because it's a water-cornea interface, not a cornea-air interface, it goes clean through the cornea, more or less unchanged in its direction. So it makes for a reasonably good image on the retina. I say reasonably good because it's not perfect, and later on it becomes inadequate even if the cornea remains clear. It can be that it's just not sufficiently focused in order to give you a satisfactory clear vision. So it's good for a number of years and for as long as it lasts, but not perfect by any means. And next, please. So I'm going to put keratoconus in the unchanged group. I'm going to put all of these little shopping list items into either changed or unchanged. Keratoconus, I think, definitely goes into the unchanged group. Let's see why it should have changed, but we sure do see a lot more of it these days. There is, however, a rumour of a name change. And I thought, if I saw Mr. Marathon Man earlier, did I? No, I thought I did. Mr. Marathon Man, he run marathons for the keratoconus group, and he teases me every time I see him because he calls keratoconus keratoconus. And I keep on saying to him, no, it's keratoconus, but I'm sure he knows that because he's had it for a long time. But there is this rumour going around that it's now called keratoconus as well as keratoconus. But I'll drift on from that one a little bit. Now, demography. Now, this is the single biggest change that I've noticed over the time that I've been involved with Moorfields Eye Hospital. Massive change in demography. If we look at a 1976 keratoconus clinic, if somebody was over 30 in the clinic, it was probably a staff member rather than a patient, which raised the question, why was nobody over 30? And we were wondering if there was a connection between reduced longevity and keratoconus. And this was popular theory throughout the whole planet, actually, because everywhere I speak to, anywhere, any country, whatever, they all said, there's nobody over 30 in the clinics. Why is this? And so we presumed that, that they just didn't survive. Oh, can you go on the slide, please? Sorry, yes. I'm pressing mine on, but I'm forgetting they don't go on your ones. So is there less longevity that you'd expect with keratoconus? Looking at the group here, I don't think there's any evidence in this room to support that anymore. So I don't think so, somehow. So there was some other reason why 30 years ago we only seen people under 30. Now, I think it was because the people came into the clinic, we gave them really horrible hard contact lenses which they could wear for about 5 minutes, or we offered them surgery which is unlikely to succeed, although one or two of them did, as we know from previous presentation. And so they just gave up and stopped coming in. And I think that is the reason why at that time we only saw people who were aged about 30, and very few older than that. I saw a few because there was a few which I even still see now, which were over 30 then wearing scleral lenses, and they still tend to come in. But generally speaking, it didn't happen. But after that, interestingly, the demography changed year on year, and it became much more normalised. All right. So fast forward to 2016. If we look at the keratoconus, did I say it then? Keratoconus, I did, didn't I? So I made a keratoconus clinic in 2016. Now keratoconus is resembling a much more of a normal age distribution. And next, please. And there is no evidence of reduced longevity as far as I can make out. And then I've went, but we've had lots of improvements in contact lens technology and contact lens options. And the next one. And increased awareness of all of these, and increased expectation levels of all of these as well. And there are some people who have achieved their 50-year plus sometimes with contact lens wear, and it's not unusual these days. So the demography is definitely changing. And can we have the next one, please? So with the increased demography of older people coming into our clinics, then we're seeing a few interesting new changes. And one of them is that some people have 50 years experience wearing contact lenses. And we can all, as clinicians, we can all vouch for the fact that there's a number of problems attached to that. I'm sure you would bear that one out. They're uncomfortable to wear for a number of reasons. Sometimes they sit on the lower lid margin like this one, and form a little groove in the lower lid. And we sit there thinking, how can that person wear that lens? But you do, and all credit to you for putting up with this difficulty all the time. You get on with it, and that's great news. This one is fitted in what I'd call a style of, how does that lens stay on the eye style of fitting? And it's because the upper lid hooks it on place, otherwise it would be falling out all the time. But didn't get much in the way from this person of any particular complaints. So carry on, you're doing okay. Oh, that's the next one. That's another one. This is an apical erosion. Now I would distinguish here between an abrasion and an erosion. Erosions are all the time chronic pain in the neck problems, rather pain in the eye problems, I suppose. An abrasion would knock you out for, could be a couple of days and you couldn't do anything with it at all. But a lot of people tolerate an erosion like this as a low-level discomfort. And these, just for the record, that green dot in the middle is an small epithelial defect which is taking up fluorescein, hence it shows when you excite it with UV light. Sometimes they're not in the middle, sometimes they're at the top. And when the lens drops down off the apex, then it reveals this peripheral erosion as well. Okay, next slide, please. And the next one. And they can be pretty uncomfortable as well. So one way and another, 50 years contact lens wear, I can see why that can cause some problems. And can we have the next one? So we have made lots of good advances. One of them, as most of you are aware here, my particular area of interest is with scleral lenses. And with scleral lenses, you can largely avoid most of these erosions, and that's one of the principal benefits. You can wear them comfortably, more or less from the outset. I can wear them all day. Couldn't wear a corneal lens for a couple of minutes, I don't think. Maybe if I had the motivation to wear it. But a scleral, it's okay. The lids slide over the surface, and they're off the cornea, as you can see from this fluorescein image here. That looks like there's an apical contact on that one. It doesn't on my one. That's a distortion of the projector. But it's clear of the cornea, essentially, and the lids slide over the surface. Can we have another one? Well, it's also increased, oh, yes, sorry, I was going to change the slide completely. Improved in surgical skills and outcomes as well. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much upon this one, but there is an interaction between the optometry and the surgery. Some of the consultants at Moorfields, if we book a double appointment, for example, and I have them booked into my clinic early on, and there's a same afternoon appointment in the consultant's clinic, the consultant will say, well, does she want to have a corneal transplant? And I would say, well, no, not at this stage. So the consultant would say, well, why should I waste my time seeing this person then? You seem to be doing okay with them. Carry on for another 6 months or a year. So we have this much improved interaction. That would have happened, I don't think, 25 years ago. But it means that you can make maximum use of resources. You don't have to use up so much clinic time, and other people can be more involved. Roger alluded to this earlier when he said there's good interaction. It's not a case of pretending to be one or the other, but we get an idea of whether somebody wants to have a transplant or not. And it does mean that we can give that person a perspective on how well they might come out of it. Now, Roger actually has let me off a hook a little bit here with this morning's presentation, because we're talking about DOLCs, and that is the deep anterior lamellar keratoplasty. And the evidence at the moment is showing that it's as good as a PK. That's not necessarily better then. Now, it could be that in 10 years' time, that evidence will switch round and there will be a demonstrable improved longevity of a transplant using a DOLC rather than a PK. But it remains to be seen whether that's the case. But the attitude has changed rather. And I get told off sometimes by some of them, some of the consultants at Moorfields, if I drop a hint that you'd have a graft as a last resort. Now, this is not an expression that I use much at all these days. I did at one time, but I don't now. It's more on the question of risk-benefit ratio. And so they will say, the surgeons will say, well, you stand a very good chance of a good outcome. And I would definitely endorse that, and I would like my group of patients to always know from me that I think that their chances of a good outcome from a transplant massively exceed their chances of a bad outcome. And I want them to know that. But what Roger also said this morning, so I can say it now without worrying too much about consequences of letting cats out of bags and things like that, you can't unoperate, you can't reverse it. So you have to be fairly sure that you're making the right decision and that we are making the right decision on your behalf or helping you to make the right decision when it comes to going for a transplant. But it is true to say that it's not really as a last resort these days. It's on the balance of probabilities, but you must be prepared to be in the group of people who, let's say, euphemistically, wish they hadn't had it done. But the same applies to people who opt to go for refractive surgery as well. And this must seem to you in this sort of absolutely crazy idea that you would voluntarily have your cornea manipulated just because you don't want to wear glasses. I should imagine most of you would give your right arm to be able to wear glasses, wouldn't you? So what a crazy idea that is. But that group of people are in exactly the same boat as well. They run the risk of wishing they hadn't had it done. Same applies with the transplant. But chances of a good outcome definitely very much exceed the chance of a bad outcome, provided that you're in a low-risk group, and the great majority of people with keratoconus are in that low-risk group. And the great majority of transplants I see are to correct optical errors after transplants rather than failed transplants, thankfully. But there is this very good increased clinical interaction between optometry and ophthalmology. As far as contact lenses for post-transplant is concerned, I think it's more difficult to fit transplanted eyes than it is keratoconic eyes, certainly with corneal lenses anyway. But for sclerals, which is, as most of you know, my stock in trade, you can fit virtually any topography with some kind of scleral lens. And next slide, please. For example, it's a very protrusive profile. It's not a lot less protrusive than the original corneal profile, actually. It had the transplant, it became almost as globic afterwards as it was before. But it got a reasonable result with a scleral lens as far as the vision is concerned, but he had a lot of complications with the transplant. This was his third. He'd lost his iris, as you can see. He developed glaucoma and cataract, but he retained a little bit of vision in the middle, which was very useful. The other eye was that globic cornea I illustrated earlier, and that one was never transplanted. And interestingly, that eye now, this chap is over 70, he's been wearing scleral lenses for over 50 years. In that eye, he's developed macular degeneration, which means he's lost the central vision in that eye, but he hasn't developed that, oddly enough, in the eye that was transplanted. So he still manages, with his transplanted eyes on the screen at the moment, with good visual acuity, virtually no field of view, that is, and in the other eye, good field, virtually no detail in the centre, carries on. And he's still surviving and he's doing okay. Go to the next one. This one is the very opposite profile, so you can have quite a lot of disparity in the outcomes in terms of profile. This one is, I describe this as the volcano style of transplants, where you have a significant dip in the middle. Sometimes they come forward. This is a relatively early stage after the transplant, and these days it doesn't have to wait 18 months before the sutures are taken out, then another 6 months before you go anywhere near it with any kind of lens. Some of the surgeons at Moorfields vary. Some of them like to wait full term 18 months. Others will say, oh, this chap needs to get back on track again. Let's get on with it. What's the problem? And there's a much more of a laid-back attitude. There's one very notable patient at Moorfields. I saw him at my practice for a little while. He's a neurology surgeon, actually. He's a brain surgeon. And he had fairly advanced keratoconus. And for many years, he was struggling on with his corneal lenses. And you can just imagine, can't you? He's in the middle of an operation, and the lens hold the operation, chaps. I think it went in the pons somewhere. So we fitted him up with a scleral, and he did really well with this. I don't think I've met anybody more motivated and more determined than this individual. He didn't see all that well with a scleral lens fitted in this style because it was off the cornea, and he needed a compressive corneal contact to sphericize the corneal surface in order to carry on with his brain surgery. But he did, and but in the end, I had to fit him with a PMMA old-style lens, because one thing I have discovered is a fairly early discovery in this road along the road we've taken to develop gas perm scleras. If you try to replicate the shape of a PMMA lens, old style, which was the 1979-80s style, which we were doing at the time, try to reproduce that in gas permeable, then it's not necessarily successful because the contact area is it's quite often quite uncomfortable because although it transmits oxygen, the finer inspection of a gas permeable material at microscopic level, it has silicone in it. What else has silicone in it? Well, sandpaper has silicone in it as well. So if you have a scleral lens made of GP materials and it's in contact with the cornea, although it transmits lots of oxygen, that's very healthy from one regard. If the contact is intolerable, it could be a bit like you're rubbing sandpaper on the cornea in a kind of, let's say, imaginary way. It's not that bad, but they can't always tolerate contact zone. He certainly could not. So we had to lift the GP lens off his eye in order for him to tolerate it, but he just couldn't see well enough, hence the PMMA lens, which he could tolerate. So it's like going back in time 30 years, and occasionally we still have to do that sort of thing. So we have to be flexible about it. Not all gas permeable, 98% I should think of. Every now and again we turn the clock back. Same applies with corneal lenses as well, actually. There's some people who can't tolerate gas permeables for the same reason. It's pretty difficult to avoid contact zones. So it could be that although you have more oxygen, you also have more erosions with RGP lenses than you do with PMMA lenses. We're not going to go back to PMMA, I can tell you that. But it is useful to be able to have it around every now and again. Some countries, Denmark, I think, they've made it an illegal material for contact lenses, which I think is a little bit over the top, a bit unnecessary, and just shows that they make laws without actually understanding why they make the laws and the purpose behind it. But we're versatile. We have lots of options available. And the upshot of this chap actually was that he finally had 2 transplants done, our brain surgeon, right and left. And we got him back in scleral lenses after about 3 months because he was very anxious to get back. He thought he was going to lose his job as a consultant neurosurgeon. So we got him back into scleral lenses after the graft. Now this time, he could see very well with a lens off the cornea because the post-transplant surface is much more coaxial than the keratoconus surface. So they don't usually need to have a contact zone in order to regularize the corneal surface to maximize the vision. So he saw very well with his GP sclerals right and left after his surgery, and he's back on track. And I saw him the other day, and he's still operating, and he's still a happy chap. I hope his patients are as well. I don't know about that. I haven't asked him about that one, but you know. But we have another connection because one of the indications for neurosurgery is acoustic neuromas, and I think he's done a few of these. And I see quite a few people in the clinic with that condition as well, or more to the point, when this chap comes in, he's done the best he can. He's removed the acoustic neuroma. Unfortunately, the proximity to the facial nerve can be a little devastating at times, and it leaves the person with a permanent Bell's palsy. Droopy lip, droopy mouth, no closure. You get terrible problems with exposure. And so a possibility might link up with him at some future date if he finds a few of those others who sends him my way. He's at Edinburgh's, actually. You might Mumswood. Don't know who it is. Can we move on one? Oh, move on another one, and another one. Oh, and another one. Can we move on one? How long do they last, transplants? Well, that came up in the conversation this morning as well, just briefly. And we are finally finding some, or being in a position to give some information on transplant longevity. That is, how long does it remain clear and functional? And the only way we can do this is to look at percentage of survival over a period of time. The Kaplan-Meier graphs that Roger was showing earlier illustrate survival or prospects of survival given a number of years post-transplant. And we're coming up with some conclusion that 20 years for a PK, you would be looking at a good result if it exceeds that. But I think this is out of date now because I took these photographs at least 10 years ago. So I think this chap has a 50-year surviving transplant. And he's still alive. The transplant's still going strong. It's a 22 diopter cylinder, difficult to fit with a corneal lens, but come over to the next slide. But dead easy with a scleral lens because you don't have to be so precise with a scleral. All you need is an optimum amount of clearance on average over the cornea, and that the lens itself seals on the sclera. In other words, doesn't leak any air bubbles during the course of wear. And if you achieve that, then by and large, you've achieved a reasonably satisfactory result. And you probably can't improve on it all that much. So his graft has survived 50 years now, and I know one or two other people whose grafts have survived 50 years. So those patients are skewing the average a little bit. They may well last another 20, and they're still going strong. But we have to give people some information about how long they would expect a transplant to last. And with the DOLCs coming in, although at the moment it's looking like very similar given the time frame that DOLCs have been available, because it seems to be levelling out. Remember those steps on Roger's diagram this morning? They suggest that DOLCs are surviving longer at this moment. So if that trend continues in 10 years' time, it could well be that the survival over 20 and 30 years with DOLCs is much better than PKs. Now, I don't want to get too much into that one because that's not my domain, but I do get involved in all of this because a high percentage of the group of patients I see at Moorfields have an option of looking at a transplant as well. And so I feel it's the right thing to do to keep them informed of a contact lens practitioner's perspective on transplants. And usually I'm in accord. I'm in accord with Steve, I'm in accord with Roger. There's one or two I'm not in accord with, so I don't say so much when I know I'm not in accord with the consultant. You have to pick your consultants, you know. Can we have the next slide? But the main big advantage, which is really good, is that you have a rapid endpoint in the process. That one I just showed you, I just put a couple of lenses on, established that there was an optimum clearance. I know what the power of the lens is. I know what the radius of the lens is. I carry out an over-refraction. I'm in a position to order a lens. And the chances are that that'll work for a long time to come. So you reach a very rapid endpoint. With corneal lenses, that is not the case. You put the lens on, and they have to sit outside. You have to sit outside while the lacrimation wears off. I would have got through 2 or 3 lenses in an eye by the time you've come back into the room again. So in the first place, it's quick, which is really encouraging because you finally got a quick result. And you can say, this is comfortable to wear from the outset. Say, I can wear them all day easily. Vision's reasonably good, especially after a transplant. And so after years of keratoconus, years of not doing brilliantly after a transplant, you can get somebody back on track quickly. Then you can come back to other lenses, and the same applies with pre-graft keratoconus as well. You can establish a reasonably good result, then come back to them later and try other things, and that's a good thing to do. People get fed up with one type of lens, want to try another. John was alluding to that earlier. You tried every type of lens under the sun, you say. It's good. That's the way it should be. Can we have the next one? I've got another one of those. Oh, can you... Sorry, can you go on one? I keep on forgetting. This mouse does not work too well on operating that screen. There's one or two other things happen as well as far as surgical is concerned. And go on one. This is all related to the increased age, the increased aging population in the keratoconus group. There's the possibility, or should say, the 100% certainty that if you live long enough, you develop a cataract. There's nothing abnormal about cataracts. It's just a normal day-to-day, year-to-year development, and everyone has them. Whether you need them taken out is another matter. You have a cataract taken out totally electively when it's interfering with your vision. Gone are the days, thankfully, when we would be saying, you need to have this done now, because that's such a paternalistic way of looking at it. It's the only thing we should say is, if you want to see clearer, you need to have this done. That's valid, but to say unqualified, you need to have this done, implies that there's an imperative to have the operation done, and there is not. You can leave it for as long as you like, and the outcome would be just the same as a consequence of leaving it, and the restoration of vision would be better, would be just the same as before. Now, if you're keratoconic approaching the age group when you're needing a cataract, then the ones we've done, which is actually a limited number because we're only just reaching this stage where we're seeing a significant number of people with cataract and keratoconus. So there's not a lot of experience anywhere dealing with keratoconus and cataract. And certainly a couple of observations I've made. One is that you need to leave it longer in order for the patient to have a significant benefit from it. If you don't, there's too many other issues. There's the corneal issues and the contact lens issues. So they tend to say, have you done it yet, doctor? Because they can't really see the difference. And the other problem is that until such time the penny finally drops, and it has in some places, not in others, the ophthalmologists who are not experienced in dealing with cataracts and keratoconus try to correct what I would describe as quasi-keratoconic myopia. Now, if you do that and you give the patient a nil-powered implant or even a minus-powered implant, instead of, if I were to have a cataract done now, I would need something around about a +20 implant to retain my emmetropia. That's no significant refractive error. But if you try to correct the myopia by putting in a plano implant, then after the operation, if you're going to continue to wear a lens, which is likely, then you need to put all that lost plus power onto the contact lens. And sometimes scleral lenses are about 10 to 15 diopters more plus power than a corneal lens, which you would fit optimally for the same eye. So if you're already on the plus side, you have to add another 20 odd diopters, so you end up with a contact lens of +30. And that has happened a few times. It's happened on a couple of occasions when I actually pointed it out and said, be careful with this one when you choose the implant, because you might end up, you need lenses afterwards, and you're going to have a massive plus on the lens, which is undesirable, especially if it's one eye only. And one person was wearing a corneal in one eye, -15, which is not unusual for a corneal lens. The other eye was drifting into a scleral anyway, developing a cataract. They tried to correct the keratoconic myopia, put in a plano implant, and you needed a +30 in the other eye. So it had -15 in one eye, +30 in the other eye. And of course, it just doesn't work. There's just an imbalanced prismatic effect. And so these are developments which are relatively new because of the aging population of keratoconus. And can we have, next one? Oh, but one point remains the same, which is, next slide, contact lenses are still needed afterwards. Hence this discussion about what IOL post-transplant. And I've actually intercepted one on the day that the person was going to have the operation. He came to see me for some reason in the morning. He had the operation lined up in the afternoon. And I tracked down the consultant, and this person, the consultant, was very pleased to have my little bit of input into it, because she didn't have a clue, actually, what implant to put in. Never thought of that, because nobody had ever said it, but why should she? The ophthalmologists are very good on ophthalmology, and apart from one or two exceptions, like one here now, not so good on contact lenses. They don't understand the optical nuances so much. So this is why interaction between optometry and ophthalmology has actually turned out to be very useful. And she was very receptive to my input, and we had a reasonably good outcome from it. The lens retains a status quo. I just said, you need to put in an implant, the same that you would put in for a normal emmetropic person, +20. Then you retain the status quo, because the contact lens induces more or less emmetropia. It converts the eye. Emmetropic is no significant refractive error. I'm emmetropic, not wearing glasses for distance, wearing for reading. But you can induce that with your lenses when you're keratoconus. So you don't have to do all the biometry. Try to measure the corneal curvature, you get nothing. Try to measure the axial length, and that is confused as well because the cornea is protruding forward. So you just don't get any result out of the normal biometry checks for measuring eye length and corneal curvature when you have someone presenting with keratoconus for a cataract operation. And also, there raises the question of, are you going to have a corneal transplant afterwards? Sometimes there is the presumption that you'll have a corneal transplant because you've had the cataract operation. So there's a certain amount of sense in that because that person is getting older. There's another few years of contact lens wear. They might be struggling. So there's a case for discussing a corneal transplant, even with a moderate keratoconus, if you're going to go for a transplant, if you're going to go for the cataract surgery. I'm not too sure that I would do it myself, but I can see that there's a case for doing it. And if so, then you have to factor in the transplant and the cataract. You can do both together. So how do you guess the implant? Guess is the operative word. Could be just about anything. Mathematically, the sensible way to do it would be to do the transplant first, then you can do accurate biometry, but that means leaving the patient with a cataract for a number of probably 2 years before you take the cataract out. But ultimately, it might be a good result. If you don't, you still have those issues of taking the cataract out too soon, and the visual benefit is reduced because of all of the other issues. So it's a very complicated issue, all this, and it's only something which is just now coming into the fore as a new clinical entity, if you like. So quite a few people here might be needing a cataract operation at some stage in the future, something which we hope will iron out a little bit in the next few years. And there's the impact of other surgery as well. Oh, sorry, kind of next slide. There's at least one person here. This is not that person, actually, but there's at least one person here for whom this is a relevant little story. Another aging process with we Homo sapiens is that we develop glaucoma increasingly year on year. And if you are keratoconic and you develop glaucoma, then that's got a few problems as well. The surgeons have become very enthusiastic about drainage surgery now, and this is the upshot of one bit of drainage surgery. They put a tube in to improve the drainage of the aqueous, and then protect the tube with a scleral patch, which you can just see on the top left-hand corner. Now that is going to make any kind of contact lens wear pretty difficult, and not least a scleral. So this was the upshot of, on the other one on the top right, putting a regular preformed scleral in. It just lifts off because of that patchwork that's on the upper temporal quadrant. Oh, I can't indicate it with this, on the top slide there. So it lifts off as you look down, and it really makes it difficult to fit even a scleral lens. And a corneal lens would bump up against that scleral plaque as well. Can we have the next slide? So this has meant that we've had to, for this and for other reasons, we've improved our development of impression lenses. And this turns the clock back about 30 years, because in the early days, 1976, 77, when I first started at Moorfields, you either had PMMA corneal lenses or you had impression PMMA lenses. But when we developed gas-permeable sclerals in the mid-80s, then largely we didn't need to use impressions very much at all, and we were trying to find reasons for never using them again as long as we live. But I'm finding now that there's a few indications for it, not least increased by this trend of scleral sculpturing that goes on with glaucoma surgery. And I've probably got about 20 people who have come through the scleral lens clinic, and we're trying to fit them with not necessarily 100% success rate either, but trying to fit them with an impression scleral lens to match that scleral irregularity and then give a corneal coverage. And so this is a considerable improvement on what it looked like before. So at least we've got a corneal coverage there. There's the, the top left-hand corner is the plaque. It's got a yellow haze to it because you put fluorescein on this one and it shows up as yellow. So that's an interesting development where it interacts with surgery, modern contact lenses. They're going hand in glove, and it's very good. Have the next slide. So as far as demography change, what's changed with the practitioner's attitude? Oh, I think I missed one there, didn't I? Oh, that's the demography. All of that was, although there's contact lens illustrations in there, they're all linked up with this idea of changing demography. So what about the practitioner's attitude? This is an interesting change as well. This was an illustration. My daughter drew these illustrations, actually, and I think that's supposed to be me on the left, although I've never had a moustache, ever. So that was a figment of her imagination, I think. But anyway, we had this conversation, and this is an actual conversation that went on in the contact lens clinic in about 1977. It was, we should offer everyone with keratoconus a spare lens. Why don't we? And the answer was, you wouldn't say that if you were full-time on the staff. Why would that be the answer to that question? Well, I'm well aware. Oh, sorry, can you go back one? Yeah, that's right. Why would that be? Why would I not say that if I was full-time? Well, yes, I'm aware that spare lenses cause problems to us more than to you. But if you order a lens of the same parameters, order it, put it on. Chances are the recipient of that lens will say, yeah, it's okay, but I prefer the other one. So to get the heart sink feel again. And you're looking at, well, what's wrong with it? It's the same lens, same material, same everything, and you want your manky old lens with scratches on it, deposits all over it, and you're offering you a nice new one here, and you don't like it. But that was the reason for that answer to that question. I'm well aware of the reasons for the answer, but even so, I still think it's a little bit of an inconsiderate way of looking at it, and it reflects an attitude at the time. There was papers written about the neurosis of the keratoconus group. They were supposed to be a neurotic group. There was a publication, I can't remember what it was now, but it shouldn't have been allowed, but it was a complete insult, and there's nothing neurotic about the keratoconus group. But what's more to the point is, because it's a frustrating thing to occur, and we didn't manage it that well. We are managing it better now, but there's still lots of room for improvement. Not surprising, really, that there's a kind of quasi-neurosis about it. I don't think there's any neurosis about it at all. There's much more neurosis amongst the practitioners than amongst the patient group. But anyway, that was the attitude at the time, and it was very prevalent. Can we have another? But things change over the years, thankfully, and the same question might arise now. We should offer everyone with keratoconus a spare lens. Oh, well, that's interesting. Of course we should. The same person, but changed a little bit. They can't manage without them. So it's taken this time to realise that you can't manage without the spare lens. So in spite of the fact they cause us some problems from time to time, now it's okay to have a spare lens. Not only that, but as John was alluding to earlier, try this lens, try that lens. The chance of that happening 30 years ago was about like winning the lottery on a ticket that somebody sent you through the post, I should think. So that wouldn't happen. So completely different attitude, but at least we're making some progress in that direction. And this is a different attitude as well. Why is somebody climbing a rock? It's an internal wall climbing exercise, actually. Well, this is a Downs person, actually, and he turned up to my practice about, must have been about 15 years ago, I suppose, and he had a hydrops in both eyes, and he was getting nowhere. Transplanting on a Downs is precarious because they're not necessarily going to report problems, so a small problem becomes a big problem. Avoid it if you can, I think most ophthalmologists would agree. But getting the lens in this chap's eye was a challenge. He could squeeze his eyes for the England GB team, I think, if there was an eye squeezing event. So have you ever seen, how many of you seen the scleral lens headlock? Some of you. Scleral lens headlock. Oh, I don't think I brought a lens along. I could demonstrate. Well, you see, you have to keep the lens filled with fluid. It's modern scleral lenses. So you have to have the lens horizontal. Otherwise, all that happens is you just get a wet shirt as you try to put the lens in. So you've got to have the lens horizontal, and you've got to have your patients with his head tucked forward as well. Now, I don't like having heads jerking up at the wrong moment, because if you do that, you get the lens half in and half out, and that's very distressing. And you've got to get it in slickly and quickly, otherwise you have your patient just ups and goes through the front door before you've had a chance to achieve anything. So the scleral lens headlock and gritted teeth stops them jerking their head up at the wrong moment. If you can visualise that. So I'm standing there here I am, there's the patient there. And when this chap, squeezing his eyes. You can only squeeze your eyes for 20 seconds, then it becomes really unpleasant. So you pick your moment, and it's in. I said to his mother, actually it was adopted mother, I said, I think I can get it in. But I didn't actually, I was thinking, oh, no, I'm going to get it out. I didn't say that at the time, because I thought it might put her off. We did get it out. It wasn't easy, but we got it out. But fantastic outcome, and he climbs rocks. He couldn't possibly do that without the keratoconus, without this keratoconus corrected. And I had an encounter with somebody who brought their son into the clinic once, and they'd said, oh, we went to little Birmingham-on-Sea or whatever, names changed to protect the innocent or the guilty. And they said, they just said, we can't, it's not going to be worth bothering with him, he won't be able to do anything. But it was, and we got a very good result with this person. But the ultimate brilliant result from a Downs person wearing a scleral lens is Danny. Oh, can you have the next slide, please? Danny is an absolutely fantastic golfer. And he can only play with his lens. He only wears one lens. For some reason, I can't talk him into having a lens in his other eye. And whatever I do, he just won't have it. But he wears the lens in his one eye, and he... can you go back one? So what an action. I mean, this is fantastic. He can hit the ball 220 yards down the fairway most times. And the reward for that is the Special Olympics team. And if you run the next one, he's very proud, rightly so, of his gold medal. And he wouldn't be able to do that without a scleral lens. But the attitude of 25 years ago was it wouldn't be worth bothering about. So I would definitely dispute that. I wondered, actually, if it had a fantastic improvement on his golf. I wondered if wearing a scleral lens would improve my golf as well. So I tried that, and it didn't actually make any difference. So it's just as bad as it was before. So anyway, the practitioner's attitude, I think we can very pleased we can put that on the changed, very much for the benefit. What about the patient's attitude? This is a bit different as well. And cartoon illustration again. This might have been a conversation in the clinic in the late 70s. I'm not seeing very well, doctor. Oh, fine, we'll book you in 6 months, see what we can do. And we'd be very grateful for that. But now I think things have changed slightly. hi doc, I've got this keratoconus thing and I want it fixed. And now, right, we'll do what we can. Yes. And of course we have the internet, which the internet's wonderful, but people do come in knowing more than we do, and that has certain up points and down points, but we live with the internet. So the patient's attitude, that's definitely changed as well. On balance, for the better, because you come in better informed, and I think that's a good thing on balance. So we mock the internet, but it is useful. There's a lot of rubbish information on the internet as well, though. That's the main problem. So people come and it says so on the internet, therefore it must be good, and they go ahead and have it done. Now that's risky. So yes, you can do it, but you have to harness the information as much as you can. Oh, what's my shopping list again? What comes next? Oh, the outsider's perception. How other people perceive. Now, we had a little bit of discussion about that. Very good to see that at the workplace and at the college, then you're having more support when you declare it. And yes, that's true. There's that point of view, there is a good improvement in the outsider's perception. But generally speaking, I wonder. So the great British public's understanding of keratoconus, if you explain it to people, then that's one thing, and you improve the situation by doing that. So why is one happy and one so glum in this? Well, his imaginary bank balance is dwindling. What do you... I haven't got an imaginary bank balance. You know, every time someone asks you, why don't you wear glasses? And if you earned £1 every time, you could retire, couldn't you? So, are less people asking these? Well, no, I think there's probably more, actually. So what's the problem then with your imaginary bank balance? And the answer is, we can't get so much for £1 these days. Yeah, well, we've got a point, that's right. But the attitude of there was not so much the attitude, it's the perception of keratoconus. I don't think has changed all that much unless you're dealing with the people that are in the know. So you have to constantly inform people and remind them and ask them for their forbearance to a certain extent, but it's always down to you to do it, because it's no good losing patience after a while and saying, oh, for goodness sake, I've told you that once before. No, it was my predecessor in the human resources department that you told before. You've got to tell the new person in the human resources department all the time, and it's ongoing, and it won't change, I don't think, at any time in the next foreseeable future. So we'll put the outsider's perception in the unchanged group, and I think that will stay that way in spite of the best efforts of the keratoconus self-help group. I don't think we'll be able to do very much to change the public perception, except under circumstances we described, Susie described earlier. You can make an impact at the workplace and college and other places, and with your friends, but generally speaking, it's such a complicated condition to understand. They'll say, well, why don't you just wear glasses? Can't see with glasses. Well, why don't you have an operation then? My friends had the laser job done. No, that won't work for me either. So, can't be bothered with you anymore. So that's a big problem, and it's interacting with people. Family as well. The family don't always get it, and so you have to keep working at them and be patient with them. Can we have the next slide? Surgical options. Well, we have transplants, which are for visual rehabilitation. I'm not going to go into that, not really my area, rightly so too. Roger covered all that this morning, but I've already put these slides in. And there's intracorneal ring segments. Intacts, they're the most common ones. There's two others that spring to mind, Ferrara rings and Kerr rings. And this is one that I photographed. There's a little bubble. Can you see a little bubble, lower fornix? That's because this person has a scleral lens on. So I come up with another one, which is don't make any difference rings. And I think quite a lot of them are that group. There's quite a modern new brand, actually, that don't make any difference rings. But I see quite a few like that. And that's either that or they become outtacks rather than intacts because they extrude or they've been taken out. So I don't see many, so it's not fair to be disparaging about it. And I know that people have said in the past that intacts have improved vision. That's great if they do. And I also am aware of some very preeminent ophthalmologists here and there, especially in the States, who say, in my hands, I can make everybody work with intacts. Right? So we'll send them all over to Los Angeles and see how they come back. But I've noticed that not that much enthusiasm for Intacs in the UK. There's a few people doing them, not many. Anybody here had Intacs? And what was your opinion? What was your thinking about it?
Can I just say that I don't think it's improved vision at all. In fact, close vision is worse. But I couldn't wear the small lens around.
So you couldn't.
It would have had to use a defect. So the comfort side.
But did it do anything though?
Sorry?
Did it do anything? The Intacs. Did the Intacs actually achieve that objective?
Yeah, the Intacs achieved the objective, increasing the comfort.
Increasing the comfort?
Well, because I couldn't wear the corneal lens.
The Intacs made your lenses more comfortable?
They did, yes.
Oh, well.
I was having to use it. Oh, is this new to you, Ken? I can't believe.
Well, no, I have had people say that before, yes, but you're saying they improved the comfort of your lenses. Did they improve your vision appreciably without the lenses?
No, and in fact, the vision was changed, and I actually felt that I do spend quite a lot of time without lenses and reading, and I did actually feel that wasn't as good.
So your Intacs must have been the didn't make any difference rings type
I think
thing.
it was it didn't make any difference. It was, to be fair, that was my idea.
Oh, yeah, it's not an unreasonable thing to try. It's not an unreasonable thing to try if you're not seeing well unaided, you're not wearing lenses very well. It's less invasive than a transplant. Most surgeons will say we can have a go with it. One or two say they don't like doing transplants after Intacs, but the majority say, well, we just take them out. So rather than do nothing, yes, of course, it's much better. Somebody else had an Intacs.
Yeah, improved comfort and vision.
Improved comfort of
Change
comfort of what?
Well, because the cone, for want of a better word, was so pronounced, I was having a lot of abrasion on the front of the eye. So it flattened that out, and as a result of the lens fitting better, the vision.
Oh, so your Intac's successful outcome then was that the Intacs changed the topography to make your lenses more comfortable. Yes, well, that's a major successful outcome. And the vision unaided compared to unaided with before the Intacs.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't have vision without the lenses as well.
No, but did the Intacs make any difference to that?
Yes, it did.
So you had a bit of an improvement in your vision unaided as well. What, the red jersey?
Yeah, I had amazing vision for 24 hours. And then,
Right.
so I had tingling at the top and bottom of one eye, and apparently the topography was so amazing that they had to take one out because I think it overcompensated for the astigmatism.
Right.
So then I had one taken out, so I got one in there somewhere, which is apparently beautiful.
I'm sure it is. Anyway, I won't dwell on that too much. But I must say, in fairness, there are some people who have said it has made a difference to them, and they were unable to wear lenses, and it avoided having a transplant, and they could get enough of an improvement to get some kind of outcome from it. So it's an option. Difficult to be enthusiastic about it as a contact lens practitioner, I must say, but there is an option. Oh, I am. I wouldn't. If somebody wanted to go for an Intacs, I could find them someone who will do it without having to go to Los Angeles. But I wouldn't say to many people, "Why don't you try Intacs?" The information is out there anyway. So if somebody wants to try it, they'll maybe come to us and they'll say, "What do you think about Intacs?" Now, in response to that question, that's quite another matter. And then we can say, "Well, if you want to give it a try, you're not doing very well with lenses. We've turned over every stone known to mankind and not got a result. Your option is do nothing, have a transplant. Yes, have a look at Intacs and see if it works for you." So I think it's great development, like anything else, but it's still there's a bit of a question mark over it. There are some successful outcomes, and that's fair enough to say that. So the surgical options, corneal transplant, intracorneal rings, there's a few others. I don't think I'll go into those at the moment. And there's the retardation of the progress of the condition, in other words, the cross-linking. And so that was well addressed this morning as well. I think I'll move. Oh, can we move on? Well, here's our two friends again. And this is demonstrating a slightly different attitude that I'm encountering now compared to about 30 years ago. Oh, can you go back one? I'm trying a scleral for Mrs. Jones. And it would be greeted universally by, in true John McEnroe style, "Are you being serious?" In other words, that's a really silly idea. But a lot happens in that time, and we'll come back to that one later. What happens with the major contact lens milestones? That was one attitude, it was development at the time. 1975 to 78, that was when I first started at Moorfields. We had PMMA corneal lenses, and we had impression PMMA scleral lenses, and that was about the lot. And then in 1978, that's when we first started seeing some early, not particularly gas-permeable RGP materials, and they developed over the next few years or so. And in 1984, we had the first gas-permeable scleral lenses, and that was actually described by an Australian practitioner called Don Ezekiel, and he made them about 3 or 4 years before anybody else was doing them. In 1990, we had advanced gas-permeable material development, and actually, it's not all that much different now from what it was in 1990. The manufacturers may tweak the materials a little bit, add a little bit of that and a little bit of the other, and change the wetting, slightly increase the gas permeability, but we actually reached more or less a ceiling point around about 1990. And we had, oh, can you go back one, sorry. And we had scleral lenses at the time in 1990 suddenly became top-of-the-range materials. So whilst with corneal lenses, it went through a development phase where we introduced a new material that made a very marginal gain over the original PMMA. Then we made it a little bit more gas-permeable, another marginal improvement. So we had these steps of marginal gains all the time. When we introduced it for sclerals, apart from the early stage in 1984, we introduced gas-permeable materials for scleral lenses when the materials had reached more or less ceiling point in development. So we had a very high gas-permeable, and it was quite effective. It transformed scleral lens practice and made it possible to fit people with scleral lenses fairly easily when it was a major undertaking 10 years, 20 years earlier. Can we go on one? And at the same time, we had some other interesting developments as well. The real, if you like, golden age of development in contact lenses was around about 1990. And at that time, we had the GP sclerals came in as a major development, but also the clever polymer technicians were devising all sorts of interesting polymers. And soft lenses, which have been around for a few years before that, decided we're thinking, well, maybe there's an application here for keratoconus as well. And there was, although the theory that you can't use a soft lens because a soft lens drapes over the irregular shape, therefore you change nothing, and the interface at the corneal surface becomes the lens just reflects the shape of the cornea, no change. But what actually happens with soft lenses used for keratoconus is that I would describe them as not really soft lenses. They're rigid lenses made of hydrogel materials. So they retain their rigid shape, and because they didn't have this problem of contacting like hard lenses do, they compress the cornea and sphericize the corneal surface. So there is actually a significant role for soft lenses with keratoconus. However, it does mean that you have thick lenses which are inclined to be hypoxic. They behave in all sorts of strange ways. Hard to be enthusiastic about being able to give someone a T-shirt for wearing soft lenses for 50 years with keratoconus, but they're there nonetheless in 30 years. And if you have the next one, next slide. Now, wow, different attitude completely. We can try out the OCT. This is the optical coherence tomography. And it's on there already. We've seen a few OCT illustrations earlier, and you can have a look at the cross-section of the cornea. And the next one, and you can also measure the clearance of a scleral lens as well. And so it's quite a potentially useful tool in assessing the way scleral lenses fit. Personally, I think that you can put 3 or 4 lenses on in the same time that you've taken your patient into the other room that has the OCT and spent 15 minutes doing OCT. So I'm unconvinced that it's that useful. It's whizzy and computerized, and everybody loves it, and you can illustrate everything, so that's fine. But I prefer, personally, to look at the lens in situ. This is a scleral lens with a full corneal clearance, a small one. Every company on the planet now makes some kind of scleral lens, but typically small diameter lenses, which means that we have that picture to look at, or can we have the next one? That one, where there's no limbal clearance, the limbus is from the periphery of the cornea, and if you go on to the next one, or you have it where it's overlapping contact from the scleral area beyond the cornea and just inside the cornea. So it's actually become a lot more complicated than it was before, but more options available. And as far as OCT, or can you go on one? As far as the OCT is concerned, this is a simple slit lamp image, and I think it's just as useful because you can sweep across and you can look at the whole lot in 2 seconds, and you've got an assessment whether you're clear on the apex, clear at the limbus, how much clear at the limbus. Why do you need to spend £40,000 on an OCT to do that? OCTs are great for other things in ophthalmology, but I don't think there's much use for scleral lenses personally. Maybe I'm being a dinosaur, but we won't say too much about that one. But then can we have the next one? See, I don't think there's much chance of a small lens going on that eye. And the next, flick on from these. And go on, a bit more. And again, I have that one already. Yeah, that's just comparing the two. Go on. 21st century impressions. I would just say a little bit about this, and then I'll call it a day after that. But we are going back. We're using impressions more than we did before. We take a cast of the eye. There's nothing new. We'd use different materials, improved. Can we have the next one? They have been around a long time, impressions, as 1 or 2 people in the audience might figure out from this slide. I'm taking it, I'm just setting up Dan Ehrlich here to get his fixation right. And that's an indication of how long they've been going strong impression. He's changed a bit over a few, I'll explain the subtleties of that one later. But we're using different materials. Oh, can we go on? And we scan the cast, and we produce a point cloud in coordinate geometry to an image of the cast. And again, that's just in the other meridian. And this is a point cloud, nasal temporal. And go on to the next one. And we would adjust it electronically to give an apical clearance. In fact, the Keratoconus Self-Help Group a few years ago supported this project and enabled me to actually get this off the ground at that time, which was a few years ago. And so I think we've achieved a few good outcomes as a consequence of that and the help from this Keratoconus group in the first place. And you can go on a bit. So what's changed in keratoconus in the next 30 years? Well, this is where we can end it, because I was going to, at this point, say, well, what do you think will be the changes in the next 30 years? And this leads into a discussion, because we've had the changes historically. Can we look forward and say what changes should we be aiming for in the next 30 years? I'll just lead one on for that. I don't think there will be huge, rapid changes in either contact lens technology or surgical input either. I think we've reached more or less a ceiling point in both. We get improvements like the femtosecond laser and that kind of thing, but essentially we're still going to have a surgical procedure where we take a cornea from one person, put it into the other, put it into the recipient, and pray to the right gods that it works out okay. And in the great majority of the cases, it will do that. And with contact lenses, we reached a ceiling point in materials technology 20 years ago. We're tweaking the designs all the time, but tweak is the operative word. So I don't think there'll be much change. I think in 500 years' time, we'll still be managing keratoconus with corneal transplants and contact lenses. But yes, but will we be able to stop it happening? You're going into eugenics with that kind of thing a bit anyway, aren't you? But, well, it remains to be seen, but I think we'll still have the management day-to-day problems with it as well. You can say something? Gentleman behind you. Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to... Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, okay, yes. You've illustrated why it's such a complicated issue to understand, because I have the diagrams, the ray diagrams I showed earlier, which I draw for a lot of people these days, which is exactly the same illustration that Susie showed earlier. The fact that you're asking that question says you don't really understand the whole optics of it. And it's not rocket science, but it's also, it's not straightforward either. However you design a spectacle lens, you still have an air-cornea interface, and there is a refractive index differential of 1 is air, and 1.4 is the corneal surface. If you put a water layer in front of it and hold that in place somehow, then your refractive index differential is 1.34 for water and 1.4 for corneal surface. In other words, not that much. So very little, comparatively speaking, very little refraction change takes place at the corneal surface if you have a water cornea interface. If you have an air cornea interface, it doesn't matter how you design the spectacle lens, that remains unchanged, and you just won't ever get a good result with the spectacle lens apart from just averaging out and a low-grade keratoconus. Yes, you do something, always worth a look, but that's why, and it will not change. The only way you can change that interface is by holding a water reservoir there. That's why. Simple as that.
Any more?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that, but I would also say that I come in for a certain amount of criticism at Moorfields for keeping people away from the surgical option for too long. Actually, I don't do anything of the kind. I keep them fully informed of their surgical options and put a contact lens practitioner's perspective on it for them, but I don't say, don't even think about it. But contrary to some opinion circles, which are, I don't say that. But as I was saying earlier, it's not a question of a corneal transplant is the last resort. It is looking at the balance of probabilities as to whether you're likely to get a good result or not. But you have to take on board what Roger was saying earlier. It's irreversible, you can't unoperate, and there was always going to be a certain number of people in that group that I wish I hadn't had it done. So we have to make sure that you're better informed than you were before, because this is, again, a relatively new development, that people are being given information to make this informed choice on the subject. It's a difficult choice to make, I think. In fact, I would be inclined to say that if you can keep going with a lens and a transplant is an option, I don't think you'll have to ever make a more difficult decision than that as to whether to go ahead with the transplants or not. There are major gains in having transplants for most people, even if they're reasonably successful with their lenses. You can circumvent the complete dependency on lenses. Now, John was saying that he needs a lens after the transplant, and that's in a way dulls down the successful outcome of that, but he sees well with that. He sees well, but he still has a dependency on lenses. So from that perspective, it's not a particularly good outcome. But certainly these days, the surgeons would expect and hope for and be disappointed if didn't achieve a result with spectacles. So even if it's the best result with glasses, as John's is the case and is still often the case with other people, because if you have one done, then in order to achieve the best balance between the two eyes, the chances are you'll need a lens and the grafted eye in order to achieve that best balance. But if you can see well enough to pour a cup of tea, get on a bus and get to work by just putting on a pair of glasses, then that's a major step forward. So to circumvent that need, that dependency on specs, is not to be sniffed at all. And so therefore, it's working out on the balance of probabilities, is this a good thing to do? But and I think we are definitely much more sensitive to the patient's requests on that. And we're less likely to say, you need to have this done now. And that does rankle with me a little bit when I hear that one. I had a telephone call from somebody in Venezuela once, one of my regular people that I've been seeing. He had a high drops. And while he was out in Venezuela, he sent me an image of his high drops, and he said, they want to do an emergency surgery. And it wasn't a particularly good image, but it was clearly a high drops, and that's all it was. It was in the middle, it knocked out his vision, but they wanted to do an emergency operation. Now, the chances are that would have gone wrong, because trying to sew in a new cornea into what is effectively mush is very unlikely to succeed. So the answer is, however bad it is with a high drops, let it resolve and see what happens. If it resolves so that it leaves a central scar and it's really opaque and you can't see anything, then you are pushed into the decision for that eye anyway, of having a transplant because there is no other option. And the high drops itself doesn't usually jeopardize the outcome of the transplant. So you're pushed into a decision. The decision's now a fairly easy decision to make rather than an agonizing one, and the chances are that you'll get a good result out of it and then say, wish I'd had this done 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, there was the option of not having it done. I think we as practitioners are now recognising that we have to be more patient-friendly, and that's definitely changing. So you don't have this, oh, they can't have a spare lens because it's too much trouble for us. That attitude is more or less gone. And we'll be looking at, can we make better alternatives for this person? Can we maybe have corneal lenses during the day and scleral lenses in the evening? Most people who hop between the two see better with corneal lenses than they do with scleral lenses because of the proximity to the corneal surface. So, but they may not be able to tolerate them. So you can use scleral lenses to augment your corneal lens wear by not having to wear it so much, and you have less erosions, less everything that corneal lenses cause. Wear both types. You can do the same with soft lenses as well. You may not get such good vision with them, but it's an option to use two types to augment your total, the expression is contact lens experience, I think, is what they say these days. But yes, we are definitely moving in those lines. I think we've made that transition, actually. Yeah, that's right, but I think we've made some big improvements in that area over the last few years, and we'll continue to. There's still some room for improvement necessary there, but by and large, I think that the pompous professional won't get away with it anymore because of the internet, because of connections, because of groups like the KC group. You're just not going to tolerate it, and nor should you tolerate it either. It has taken a little while to recognise that this is a peculiar problem. And one thing about keratoconus, which I also hadn't mentioned but hasn't changed, is that it's hard to think of another condition where you can transform somebody's life so dramatically if you're successful with your treatment options. If you can't see, you're offering fingers up like this, and it's Susie's moon illustration. If you offer up fingers, the answer could be somewhere between 2 and 20, I think, something like that. And not a clue. Put a lens on and you're driving a car, or at least pouring a cup of tea anyway. So same applies to the transplant. It transforms your life. And not only does it transform your life, but you're transforming the life of a young, productive person. It's not a geriatric condition where you're keeping somebody going in a state of semi-vegetation for the next 10 years. We're restoring somebody's sight, livelihood, potential, everything. And it's relatively easy to do it, but it's just that it's labour-intensive and in times cumbersome to do it. We have to look at the options, try to find what's the best way forward. And I think we can certainly make some improvements in that area as well. But recognising that we're dealing with a productive group, it really irritates me that we can't order this lens, or this hospital can't set up this type of unit because, well, for scleral lenses is a case in point. There are quite a few hospitals that won't set it up because I haven't got the funding for doing it. Oddly enough, they can send them to another hospital and it costs them more than it does to buy a fitting set. I've never quite been able to work out the mathematics on that one, but this funding issue is the most difficult thing to deal with, and it's because you're not taking something out of a bank. If you have even a corneal transplant, but certainly an IOL for a cataract, it comes in a supply. You could dip into it, and from time to time, the bank is replenished. Same applies to, it's specialised, but same applies to some extent with corneas, because there are cornea banks, 4 of them in the country, and now there's not so much of a problem with material because we can dip into these banks. It's readily available. It takes a while to prepare a cornea, and so by the time that cycle is coming through, usually the material is there and available. But it's taken out of this supply, so you replenish it. So there's not an invoice attached to a particular person. But if you're on the contact lens clinic, we order you a lens. It's actually a paper trail which goes back to you as as an individual. Not that anybody's going to ask you for funding in any way, but it's, well, how many more lenses do we want for this person? And there's always this in the background, which is really irritating, because compared to the cost of a transplant, the cost of keeping somebody in contact lenses is chicken feed, it's peanuts, and it's just nothing. So why can't we, why is this made so difficult to effect something which is a relatively inexpensive way of maintaining a productive person in society? I mean, the chances are that you're all self-supporting because you go to work, you pay your taxes, you pay the health service contributions. If you don't wear your lenses, you don't work, you're not making any contributions, you become a net drain on society. With your lenses, you become a net bonus to society. But we cannot seem to find a way of recognising that, and I think that is a great pity, and that's what I think is the change which you as a group should be striving for more than anything else, to increase this recognition that we're dealing with a productive group of people in a highly productive way for virtually nothing on the grand scheme of things. The NHS is in the process of yet another crisis. I think NHS crises are yearly, quite honestly, and this year will happen again next year, and we can pump in another 20 million into it, and that will go towards MRI scanning devices and this, that and the other. It won't go to the contact lens community, I don't think. So you need to be looking at alternative ways of funding it. I think there's as much chance of increasing the funding of keratoconus as winning the lottery, quite honestly. I just don't think it will happen. Yes, you're right. And not only that, but young people, not necessarily minors, but young adults are faced with the same situation, and they're unlikely to be able to look forward 10 years and say, what's the prospects of a successful outcome here? And the idea of a quick fix when they're struggling with their contact lenses is very attractive in the short term. And I think we certainly, I've had a little bit of first hand on that one, and there was one or two cases where, are you being serious? Are you being serious? You really want to put this young person in for a transplant when they're doing quite well with their lenses? And that is actually still happening. And in other countries, when they don't have our sophisticated contact lens service, it's happening all the time. But I find that very disconcerting that people are still being precipitously nudged into transplanting. And I can't help thinking that the information is not being put across, even if it ostensibly is being put across, but it's not being taken in, and that's the same thing as it not being put across. So if you're dealing with someone who's not taking it in, you're not putting it across. That's my view on the subject.
Ken, I'm afraid we have to stop there, but can we all thank Ken for his presentation?
Thank you. Thank you for your...